financially provide and maintain your parents? Some people say no, some people say yes, some people say this, etc., etc., etc. Crystal clear. So the answer to this question, like many other questions, is a double-edged sword or two-sided coin. Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes. The yes part is the Prophet ﷺ in the authentic hadith, he said to one of his companions, he said, "Anta wa maluka li abika." You and your wealth belong to your father. That's clear. You and your wealth belong to your father. Understood? So the scholars of Islam, they explain this hadith that the child must give the father and the mother, parent, the wealth with two conditions. Condition number one is that the parent need the wealth and not usurp the wealth. Give it, snatch it and take it. And secondly, is that the child has the ability to give them that wealth without harming himself and his needs and his responsibilities. So from one aspect, the child, no doubt, belongs to the parent. And in most cases, rather, I'll make a bold statement. I'll say in all cases, the child's success is due to the parents. That's a fact. Now you may say, well, what about the people who never knew their fathers or their mothers? And once again, guys, stay with me, please be patient. This is extremely important when it comes to different cultures and races being mixed. Whatever the reason is, you never grew up with your father because of drugs, alcohol, because of a war, a civil war, you migrated, your father didn't make, whatever the reason is, wherever you come from, my father wasn't in my life. And I have resentment. I feel some type of way that my father wasn't there. He left my mother, he got divorced. I had to grow up and make it on my own. No problem. So you become a very successful businessman, or you become an Islamic scholar, or you become a famous and rich, powerful boxer, and they interview you, and they say, what did you learn from your dad? You grew up in a boxing. He says, my dad didn't teach me nothing. My dad wasn't there. I made everything myself, etc., etc., etc. So his dad wasn't directly responsible for his success in boxing, but why do you think he became such a great boxer? Why do you think he was such an overachiever? Because what? Because his dad wasn't there, or his dad mistreated him, and his dad told him, you'll never amount to be anything. You're not good enough. So the father is always responsible for the son's success. That's a fact, directly or indirectly. And of course, the mother as well, the mother is directly or indirectly responsible for success as well. My father left, my mom was my dad and my mom. She was both parents in my life. She supported me. She said, you can do it, baby. You can do it, son. So she directly is responsible for my success. Or, unfortunately, my mother was on drugs. Or my mother, she left. My mother got a divorce from my father, and that forced me to be the overachiever. So whether you like it or not, you're always in debt to your parents. That's a fact. One way or another. So you belong to your parents. Parents gave you birth. And your wealth belongs to your parents, whereas the money that you're making is a direct or indirect result of your parents. Whether they were good, bad, whether they were there or whether they weren't. But most people, they don't want to accept it, but that is the truth. And anyone who grew up without a father, he knows the driving force, the battery in my back, the pain of me not having a dad. That's what made me such a good person, such a strong person to do the right thing, because I saw my dad beat up my mom. I witnessed my dad batter my mother, and that made me a good, kind husband. So you're always indebted to your parents. That's a fact. So from that aspect, the child, his wealth in reality is the parents' wealth. So that's the yes part. Let alone the fact that if his mother is needy, if his daughter, or if his father is needy, his or her, either or, and you do have the wealth, and they're needy, they're begging, they have needs, you have to spend on them. You're Islamically responsible for maintaining them if there's no one else who can. So that's the yes part. As far as the no part, then we have a mother and a father who have their own money. They have their own wealth. They don't need the son's wealth. They don't need the daughter's wealth. But they're greedy. or they're self-controlling. And they don't want to acknowledge the fact that my son is no longer a little boy. He's a grown man. He has a wife, he has children, I have grandchildren. I can't treat him the way I used to treat a little tiny boy. But parents oftentimes are damaged themselves. They need therapy themselves. They have to relinquish, my son is a grown man. But they don't, so therefore they look for an outlet. And that outlet is, I can't control you physically, you're bigger than me, but I can still say, give me your money, give me your check. And I can say, you have to do it according to Islam. And that's not absolutely correct. That's the no part. Whereas the Quran and the Sunnah clearly prohibit the abuse of a Muslim's wealth. The Quran and the Sunnah clearly prohibit the abuse of a Muslim's wealth. And it prohibits the eating and the consuming of a Muslim's wealth illa an taradin, unless you're mutually pleased and there's consent. This is mine, you can have it now. Versus you taking it from me. Or me keeping silent about it, and deep down inside, I have resentment, in my heart resentment that you took my iPad from me. So therefore it's a yes and a no answer. If when the parents are needy, if when the parents have no one else to look after them, and the child has the money, the child is obligated to do so. If and when the mother or the father requests money from the child, and it doesn't harm the child has the money, the child has no choice but to open his wallet or his checkbook or whatever and give the parents the money because you and your wealth belong to your father. But it does not give parents full autonomy to just gobble up and swallow up the child's wealth, especially if the child has his or her own family to look after. So if you think about it now, a man has a daughter, and this daughter gets married, she has a husband. Who has a greater right to this woman, her husband or her father? The woman, her loyalty to which of the two men is stronger? Her husband or her father? Some say husband, some say my father. I gave you birth. You came from me. Before your mother, you came from me. You're my flesh and my blood. You may divorce this man tomorrow, but you'll always be my daughter. Blood is thicker than water. And then another person says, that's true, but I share a bed with this man. This man is my heaven or my hell. My ticket to Jannah it lies with the kind treatment and the respect and the obedience to this man. I may confide in him. I tell him secrets. This man knows things about me that you, my father, don't know, etc., etc. So it's bitter and sweet at the same time. So the man or the daughter, I have my own family that I have to take care of, and the parent is supposed to be acknowledging the fact that I've raised a man, alhamdulillah. Why would you want your son to continue to be a boy? Something's wrong. And there are unfortunately, many Muslim parents, they have this mental sickness. He's a grown man. He's not a little boy anymore. You should be proud that he's a grown man. That means you did a good job. Versus, I will continue to micromanage your life for the rest of your life because you're my son. So therefore, in brief, it's yes, and I'll explain why it's yes. And at the same time, it's no. And I've explained in detail why it's no. Hopefully that's clear, inshallah.
Okay, two things. Let me go back to the taking care of the parents. Is there a hadith that I can go to when discussing this with the sister? Because she says she has hadiths that state that the children owe the parents nothing, that they do not have to care.
No, that's wrong.
But
several hadiths from the hadith I just mentioned to you, the Prophet said that you and your wealth belong to your father. Okay? And the concept of the Prophet ﷺ, he says, "Ibda biman ta'ud." Start off with your own family. And that hadith is dealing with those who are under you. And the reason why you have to start off with them is because they need you. So if your mother or father, if they're needy, then of course that takes even greater precedence. Treat your parents honorably and respectfully. And you have to make dua for your parents. Oh Allah, have mercy upon them as they had mercy upon me when I was small. Alright, so there are many Quranic verses, and there are many hadiths that deal with the fact that the child can never repay the parent fully. You can never ever repay your father and mother 100%. Just like a student can never repay the teacher 100%. Never. You can't give that person what they gave you. You can't pay them what they gave you of sacred knowledge. There's no price of it. Okay? But at the same time, I think, in all honesty, best sister, I think that the sister who's having this discussion with you, she's probably a victim of the extremism that many Muslims have. And that is, everything's mine. Give me your whole check. Give me your house, give me everything. And in most cases, that's cultural and not necessarily Islamic. And no parent in his right state of mind is going to want to take everything from his son or from his daughter. But there are many Muslim parents who do so. And there are many Muslim parents who abuse Islam and they use it in their favor when it's convenient for them. Parent doesn't even pray. And they'll tell the son, if you get married to this girl that I don't want you to get married to, I'll make dua against you. You don't even pray. Who said your dua is even accepted? Who said that Allah loves you and doesn't love your son who does pray? If you marry this girl that I don't approve of, your prayer will be invalid. I'll disown you as my son. Many parents, they abuse Islam. Paradise lies under the feet of the mothers. They only quote that when it's convenient for them. So that's a problem.
The second part, when you were talking about the honoring, which one she would choose, the wife honors the wife, the wife honors the husband or the father. Is there a hadith that states that the wife is supposed to, when there's issues arising, or say like the father would come over and say, okay, you have to come home, you have to do this, and the husband say no. And she would have to listen to her husband.
For sure. And the proof of that is that the father, he was the wakil, the wali, the guardian of the girl. But the moment the marriage was done, it's over. She's mine now. Huh? Your daughter is now mine, meaning she's my wife. It's over. So she still has to respect her parent, her father, of course. But the absolute obedience, no. Absolute, Lord, that's for the husband now. And Allah knows best. And that's something which is pretty much accepted in and outside of Islam, such as a surname. A woman loses her family name now. And she takes on the name of her new husband. Even though that's her whole entire family, but she's in the household, she's under the care, the maintenance, the inheritance, the insurance of her husband now. That's outside of Islam, let alone in Islam. Okay, so there are many different hadiths which give us the general ruling that the husband now has a higher standing, and she has greater loyalty to the husband from one aspect. And from another aspect, no husband can ever take the place of the father. And she could be divorced from that husband. She could leave. The husband could die. She could become a widow. But she'll always be the daughter of that man. And in Islam, a woman does not change her last name. She keeps her family lineage. So it's like I said, it's a give and a take. A give and a take. The man knows best.
I'm not going to take up too much of your time.
No problem.
I'm keep you continuing, inshallah. The other thing, the discussion we had was on adoption, and it made me hit my research, and because I adopted a couple of kids, and she went and was saying, okay, you cannot adopt, you cannot change that person's name. I said, well, I didn't change their name. And I said, I took them into my own. Well, I adopted them, and I need a clarity on that. She's saying, and I read on my own some of the things that Surah Islam saying that about the orphan, you cannot, touch their money, cannot change their name, take their father's name away from them, which is none of those things I did, but the Lord had in my heart. I told her, I adopted the child. So, just clarify a little bit, how can we?
Understood. Well, unfortunately,
Can you repeat the question, Sheikh?
the question is regarding adoption. Can you adopt in Islam? If you can, do they take away your last name? So on and so forth. I don't mean to say this to be funny, but in all honesty, the answer to this question is yes and no as well, like the last one. It's not black and white. It's not black and white. So the word adoption is a word. Obviously, adoption is not Arabic. Okay, a Tibetani. It's taking someone as your child. Adopt or not someone is now your ibn, your bint. Can you or can you not? There are no doubt there are many aspects of adoption in Islam which are permissible, and there are many aspects of adoption which may be obligatory, such as a child that's been left and abandoned. Left and abandoned because of war. Parents were killed. Family was decimated. Drugs, anything. Or there's a young child that wants to be a Muslim. Their parents, their grandparents, a malicious grandmother wants. She's evil and she wants to change his fitrah. And you have the ability to take this child in, feed them, raise them, nourish them. He wants to be Abdurrahman. And his grandmother wants him to be Thomas or whatever. You have the ability and there's a need, that's a different story. Versus a person adopting just for the sport of adopting. I don't want to have my own kids, but I just want to adopt. And the child is going to be attributed to me. This is my son, not my little brother, not my stepson, my legal son. I'm the legal guardian, etc., etc., etc. So there are times in Islam in which adoption is permissible. Permissible. And there are times in which adopting could be what? Mandatory. A child is going to be wasted and harmed. And Allah allowed you to save that child without harming or violating anyone else's rights. Different story. And there are other times in which the term adoption is illegal in Islam, such as this child inheriting from you. This child having the ability to be uncovered in front of your daughters. This child taking on your last name, son of such and such. No. Rather, you say, this is my little brother. Now, on paper, that's a different story. As far as the secular governments, that's a different story. And in the world today, the naming system is different. Is Johnson or Jefferson, is that the name of your father? Is that the name of your father? Okay, the concept of a person who used to be a slave, he cannot ascribe himself ila ghayri mawalihi, to other than those who owned him. Jefferson didn't manumit me. Hamilton didn't manumit me. They didn't let me go. There was a war that was fought. There were rules that were forced and implied, and we were set free. So if I change my last name, that doesn't mean that I'm ascribing myself to other than my father. And that doesn't mean that I'm ascribing myself to the one, except because there are hadiths about that. So a legal matter. My last name is Abdul Hamid, right? This boy or this girl needed a home, needed protection, needed a roof over their heads. I took them in. I raised this boy like my son. He isn't my son. Islamically, I cannot call him my son, meaning it. I can use a general term, call my student my son. But he's not my son. He's not Fulan ibn Muhammad, etc. But on paper, in order for him not to be violated with regards to things that he needs, whether it's insurance, etc., 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 I may have to put Abdul Hamid as his last name. I may have to put that in his passport because of the way the world is today and not the Islamic ruling. So that's the yes part. And there are other parts in which you cannot adopt and that person does not become your actual child. Rather, that is an adopted child, which you would call your little brother. They are not to take your ascription, but we don't have that naming system anymore. People don't go around and identify Ibn Fulan. That's out. That unfortunately, that's outdated. The non-Muslims have gotten rid of that. Rather, people they ascribe themselves to the last names. Jefferson is not the name of my father. Understand? My middle name isn't the name of what? My father. Muslims who come from overseas, many countries, not all, but most of them, they don't have their father's name in their passport. Rather, it's a compound name. A few Muslims from a few countries actually have Ibn such and such. Okay? So that's the part of it in which it isn't going to be that applicable. I'm not making sense clear?
No.
Inshallah.
A little bit.
To simplify it, keep it simple.
Okay.
You can take a child into your home and raise your child and feed them and nurture them and treat them as your own son. You can do that. You can. That's lawful. Okay? But in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this adopted son can never be your son. Like,
No inheritance rules for them.
no, you can put them in a will. You can put them in a will, but there is an inheritance. My son inherits from me, whether I like him or I don't. Whether he hates me, curses me, as long as he's my Muslim son, he inherits. Someone that I do want to get my money, but he isn't an heir, can be placed in a will.
Okay.
You understand the difference? So right now, let's say for example, a man is on his deathbed, and he doesn't like his wife. They lived for years with disharmony, and he knows he has a lot of money. And when he dies, his wife is going to inherit all of the money. He doesn't like this woman. He doesn't love her. So on his deathbed, he divorces her. As he's dying from cancer, stage 4 cancer, he says, you're divorced. That's impermissible. He can't do that. That woman, whether they like each other or not, has a right to his wealth. My son, who's ungrateful, who's disrespectful, who's a failure in life, he's not getting the $50,000 or the $1 million. No way. In Islam, it's his haqq to that wealth. And then I have a stepson, or I have a student who's the most dutiful and respectful person to me. He treated me like I was his father. He deserves the money. He can't get the inheritance, but I can give him a share of it in my wasiyah, the will. So hijab, mahram, uncovering in front of, inheritance, these things cannot take place through traditional adoption.
Oh.
Yes.
So for my daughter, because I have a daughter and a son for the daughter, then she couldn't uncover
No.
my son.
No, unless,
My son. could not
exactly,
uncover.
they can marry, etc. Because it's not your son in the
They
sight.
can marry.
Yes,
Okay.
it's not your son in the sight of the law. Legally, different story. On paper, different story. And of course, there are exceptions to some rules. If a woman had a son, if she had a boy in her household, she raised him and she treated him, she loved him from day one. She found him when he was a young baby, 2, 3 years old, whatever the case may be. And now he's grown, he's getting grown. And it's a hardship for you covering in front of him. That's my son. What do you mean he can't give me a hug and a kiss? It's my son. But he isn't your son.
Oh, they can't hug me?
No, he can't touch you because he's not your son. But there are ways around that with regards to breastfeeding, so on and so forth. More technical things. You get the point I'm trying to make?
Uh-huh.
You can take them in your home, adopt them, but at the same time, it's not what? How we use the term. Hopefully that's clear, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Khayr, inshallah. If that's it, and we'll wrap up. Yeah, sure.
I have a question as far as in, when a woman wants to marry, and her father is not Muslim, how does she go by doing that as far as in, the guy is Muslim because she just took her shahada and she's Muslim. But her father is not Muslim, and we know the father is the wali. So how does that person go about? Do the Muslim brother has to go to her father?
Understood. A woman wants to get married. The father says no. The father is preventing her from marrying whom she wants to marry. What does the daughter, the young lady, the young woman, the girl, what does she do? What options can she take to get married and not to be monopolized and controlled by her father? Very common question. And it happens very often, especially in the melting pot in which we live. You can't marry this guy because he's from a different race. You can't marry this guy because he's from a different caste. He makes less money. He's not noble. You can't marry this one because of such and such and such and such. So what does the girl do? If the father has a reason or reasons which are clear, which are factual, the girl should obey and follow the advice of her father. If the father doesn't have the necessary reasons, and is prejudice or micromanagement or him trying to make her life miserable, and he can't prove why this is an unsuitable suitor, then the father is to be advised. And the people should tell me that, fear the law. You can't do this. You can't oppress your daughter like this. And warned that if you continue to prohibit your daughter from getting married without a valid reason, you will lose your right to be in the wali. He will lose his Islamic right. And if he loses that right, then her other male guardians will take the place of the wali, whether it's her grandfather, whether it's her brother, whether that's her uncle, etc., etc. If a Muslim sister comes from a background, like you said, she has no Muslims in her family, then obviously the local imam, he can be her guardian. The local resident imam, resident scholar, he can be her wali. But he should try his best to speak to the father, to advise the father, instead of the girl getting married, coming home, telling the father, I got married. There's going to be big problems. Big problems. How could you marry my daughter without my permission? You have no right to do this. I dishonor you. You dishonored us, etc., etc., etc. And the big problem of this is we have two extremes now. Extreme A, extreme 1, is the father who tells his daughter no for no sound Islamic reason except for personal or jahiliyyah reasons. I don't want you marrying someone who's white. I don't want you marrying someone who's from Bangladesh. I don't want you marrying someone who's from Yemen. I don't want you marrying someone who's black. I don't want you marrying someone who's older. I don't want you marrying someone who isn't a virgin. I don't want you marrying someone keda. That's not an Islamic reason. If the person has deen and khulq, good religion, good character, that's not a valid reason. And then there's another side in which the father says no, not because of race. The father's not prejudiced, but I don't feel comfortable with this guy. I don't think he's a good guy. I don't care what color he is. He can be purple. It's not about color, but this brother isn't right. I don't feel comfortable. You deserve better than him. And the girl doesn't listen. She ignores her father's advice. She gets married. A week, 2 months later, she calls her father, comes home crying. He did this to me. He beat me up. I found out he has a whole nother lifestyle, etc., etc., etc. The father's going to say, I tried to tell you, but you didn't want to listen to me because love is blind. You were so much love with him, you were blind to the dark things that I knew or I felt strongly about this guy. Or a brother, he wants to get married to a sister and he doesn't have a job. He lives at home. He has no livelihood. The father tells him no, and then he accuses the father of being racist. Oh, your father doesn't want us to get married because no, it's not about race. You don't have a job. How are you going to support my daughter? You sell oils? Mashallah. You drive a truck? Something, money, making some type of money. You have nothing. So there are two extremes here. The father should not have his haqq removed without a valid reason. And the father should not prevent his daughter from getting married to the man that she wants to without a valid reason. If and when the father refuses to be reasonable, refuses to be cooperative, refuses to be just, the father can be removed and the sister can get married through another source, but it shouldn't be done in haste. That's the point. You shouldn't rush to remove the father because no one, in most cases, has the jealousy and the care and the concern for the girl like the father. That's a fact. Even if he isn't the best Muslim. He can drink alcohol. He can gamble. He can be a bad Muslim, but he still loves his daughter. And he still has jealousy for his daughter like the local imam is not going to have. And it's not personal, but you're not my daughter. There are hundreds of sisters that come to me want to get married. Versus, this is my flesh and my blood. I'm not the best Muslim, but you're my daughter. Let alone the fact that oftentimes a sinful father, a sinful wali, he may know things about this guy who looks so pious and righteous. I have friends who tell me that they've seen him in certain locations that you would never know about. You see him in the masjid, but I have other friends who see him in other places. So don't rush in rejecting the father's advice, but at the same time, the father does not have full monopoly over his daughter, especially if it's based off of race or based off of greed, and based off of insignificant worldly reasons to tell his daughter no. And Allah knows best. Hopefully that's clear.
But my question was basically, you kind of touched bases on Islam, but what I was trying to ask was, the person doesn't have, like, say for instance, the father doesn't want her to marry a Muslim, like if her father was a preacher or something, to try to stop her from.
No, a non-Muslim can't be the guardian. Yes, if her father was a Christian or a Jew or an atheist or whatever, he is the only one that can be a wali for a Muslim woman is a Muslim, a righteous Muslim man. So, for argument's sake, sister comes from a good, strong family. Family remains to be Christian. She is not allowed to have the father to be her guardian, but she should include him. Speak to him. Dad, I want to get married. Dad, my religion, etc., etc., etc. Give him respect. And that's also good dawah. That's also good dawah. But for argument's sake, if you have to just cold turkey, that's the way it is. This is Islam. You can't be my marital guardian. And maybe that'll wake him up. And maybe he'll accept Islam because of that. Hopefully that answers a specific question. Inshallah. Wallahu a'lam. Wa iyyakum. Inshallah. We'll stop here tonight. Thanks a lot, guys, brothers and sisters. Shukran lakum. Ala husni insatikum wa istima'ikum. Thank you very much for your attentive listening, your participation, your love and your respect. May Allah Azza wa Jalla bless you in both worlds. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alhamdulillah, brothers and sisters, again, we thank y'all for your patience, and we thank Mufti, alhamdulillah. Just to repeat of what's going to happen, our schedule got a little shifted. So inshallah, we'll have Mufti lead us in Isha prayer. Inshallah, he's the travelers, we'll pray 2 rakats. We'll pray the remaining once the salam's out. And we have plenty of food for everyone. We have 100 plates. There's not 100 of us here. We're going to take 3 plates. So alhamdulillah, we have good food for Falafel Express. We'll pray Isha right now.